The sun had barely crested the horizon when the first sirens wailed down Maplewood Drive, cutting through the morning stillness like a blade. I watched from behind my garage door as our neighbor Karen Hastings, the self-appointed guardian of our cul-de-sac, strode onto my driveway, phone clutched in one hand, a scowl etched so deeply it looked permanent. Her rotund frame was framed by a lacy floral apron that had seen better days, and her expression radiated entitlement. In one breathless accusation, she told the dispatcher that my wife, Elena, had trespassed on HOA property, as if the strip of grass between our homes belonged to some invisible bureaucracy rather than to the rightful owneress. Elena had merely stepped outside to retrieve the Sunday papers I'd forgotten on the porch. 2 minutes later, our street was crawling with patrol cars, red and blue lights reflecting off shiny chrome. Karen basked in the attention, her face flushed like a vindictive trophy. But beneath my heart's pounding indignation, a plan was already forming. I'd spent years building my dream home here, hand-laid stone walls, solar panels perched on the roof, and a landscaped garden that turned heads. Karen's little white picket fences and plastic gnomes could never compare. Yet today she'd humiliated my wife for a trivial slip of etiquette. That would end. I invited the local news crew to interview us for their HOA expose series. When the reporter knocked, Karen was mid-siren call, still ranting about encroachment. I ushered Elena inside and offered coffee to the camera team. The shift in energy was immediate. The reporter's curiosity sparked, and soon questions flew about Karen's repeated overreach, her history of petty fines, her habit of policing neighbors' lives. Karen, momentarily off balance, sputtered denials. Yet the breeze carried hushed laughter from other onlookers who remembered her slapping violation notices on lawn ornaments and mailing out threats over fallen leaves. I seized the moment. If trespassing is stepping onto your own driveway, I asked the camera, then maybe it's time we questioned who really owns the street. The phrase lingered in the air like a gauntlet thrown. Karen's eyes narrowed. She planted herself defiantly on my front step, arms akimbo, peering into the lens as if daring us to proceed. That's when I served her the eviction notice signed and notarized by the county court, naming her as a former owner of the neighboring lot that she'd fraudulently transferred to the HOA coffers. The wooden board at the edge of her beloved flower bed suddenly bore new meaning. The scrawled words "trespasser," "try eviction" were no longer a joke but a prophecy fulfilled. The reporter's camera zoomed in as I handed Karen the papers. Her jaw dropped so hard I thought it would shatter. The crowd gasped. Karen's voice cracked as she demanded a recount, an apology, even threatened legal action. None of it mattered. The finality of the judge's seal gleamed under the morning light. As the news crew captured her meltdown, her outraged screams muffled by stunned silence, I realized this was more than personal revenge. It was a reckoning for every petty rule she'd enforced, every heart she'd bruised. And when the anchor delivered the closing line that evening, questioning whether HOA abuse had gone too far, the spotlight had shifted from my wife's alleged trespass to Karen's spectacular downfall. The story would spark debates across social media feeds, forums, and neighbor watch groups. Was justice served, or had we gone too far? I leaned close to the camera and offered a final challenge to viewers. Share your thoughts below. Was Karen in the right, or did she get exactly what she deserved? My heart thundered as Karen's face turned a ghastly shade of red, her false confidence evaporating under the weight of that stamped seal. The onlookers' neighbors who once nodded politely as she handed out fines for crooked shutters, now whispered among themselves, eyes flashing with vindication. In that instant, I realized this confrontation was no longer just about my wife's dignity. It was about every frustrated homeowner silenced by her tiny tyrannies. I motioned to Elena, her composure finally returning, and together we stepped back, granting Karen the center stage she had always coveted. She fumbled with the eviction notice, her fat fingers trembling as she scanned the lines that revealed her own misdeeds. Fraudulent property transfer, HOA fund misappropriation, and obstruction of community rights. Each violation was a dagger struck into her inflated ego. Suddenly, the sound of hooves echoed down the street. Heads snapped toward the entrance as Sheriff Donovan, our longtime family friend, rode past on his black stallion, flanked by 2 deputies. He dismounted, eyes surveying the chaos, and his calm presence sent a ripple of relief through the crowd. I had arranged for him to arrive at the opportune moment. Neutral, authoritative, impossible to ignore. His arrival was the twist no one saw coming. A reminder that justice would be served not by gossip and rumor, but by law and order. Sheriff Donovan cleared his throat. "Karen Hastings," he announced, voice low but carrying. "By order of the county court, this eviction is effective immediately. You are to vacate the premises within 24 hours. Karen's mouth flapped open like a fish hauled from water. She swallowed, tried to stammer an objection, but the sheriff raised a hand. No further debate. A hush fell over Maplewood Drive. The midday sun glinted off the eviction papers pinned under Karen's manicured nails, a monument to her downfall. As she struggled to comprehend her new reality, the neighbors edged closer, some offering nods of approval, others murmuring claims of past abuses, late fines, spurious citations, cruel letters about paint colors. Each story wove a tapestry of resentment that had been building for years, finally unveiled in this single act of public accountability. I could almost taste the collective relief that washed through the street. But amidst the satisfaction, I felt a pang of hesitation. Had we crossed a line? Elena squeezed my hand, and her steady gaze reminded me of our guiding purpose. Not vengeance, but justice. I stepped forward once more and addressed the crowd. This isn't about me or Karen. It's about ensuring that every voice here matters more than any petty rule. The murmurs of agreement swelled. Faces that had once cowered under Karen's petty reign now shone with hope. Even the news crew quieted, sensing history unfolding. Then, from the edge of the gathering, a soft voice called out, "And what about the others she's hurt?" It was Mrs. Alvarez, our elderly neighbor whose garden had been declared a violation for unauthorized landscaping. The memory of her tears when she had to tear out her cherished rosebush struck a chord in everyone. Heads nodded again, and I realized there was more to do than evict one tyrant. This moment was a catalytic call to rebuild our community on respect rather than fear. As the sheriff escorted Karen toward the awaiting patrol wagon, her floral apron stained with sweat and shame, I felt the full weight of victory settle in. Yet in that triumph, a familiar figure slipped from the crowd. Victor Hale, the HOA treasurer whose name had been conspicuously absent from Karen's eviction notice. His sharp suit and crisp tie contrasted with the dusty drive, and suspicion flickered in my mind. Victor had handled the HOA's finances, collaborated on every fine Karen issued, and double-signed petty citations. Had he been a silent partner in her reign? I motioned to the sheriff and quietly asked him to remain. Then I approached Victor, placing the eviction notition, its official enveloping his hand. His eyes darted from the sealed flap to Karen's retreating figure. "Your turn," I said softly. His jaw clenched. For a heartbeat, I saw the same fear and contempt Karen had displayed, and I knew the balance of power was shifting irrevocably. But instead of fleeing, Victor straightened his shoulders and raised his chin. "Very well," he said, voice trembling but resolute. "I'll cooperate." The crowd stiffened as two more deputies emerged from a patrol car, handcuffs gleaming. Without another word, Victor allowed himself to be led away. A collective gasp rippled through Maplewood Drive. The entire HOA leadership was unraveling before our eyes. Karen's empire of petty rules lay in ruins, and at its core, the man who had enabled her tyranny had met his reckoning. Elena wrapped her arm around me, her smile radiant despite the whirlwind of events. I realized then that the true victory was a community awakened to its own power. The news anchor concluded her live segment with one final question. What message does this send to homeowners across the country? I turned to the camera, my voice strong with conviction. That our neighborhoods belong to all of us. That no single person, no matter how loud, how entitled, or how feared, can dictate our lives when we stand together. And that when we hold each other accountable, we reclaim the respect that was rightfully ours. As the broadcast faded to black, neighbors gathered in small groups, exchanging plans to rewrite the HOA bylaws, propose community gardens, and establish fair conflict resolution committees. The sting of old injustices lingered, but hope eclipsed anger. We had witnessed the dramatic collapse of a petty reign and the birth of a new era rooted in empathy and shared responsibility. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the rooftops, Elena and I stood on our front porch, surveying the street now buzzing with optimism. "You did good," she whispered, pressing her forehead to mine. I kissed her temple, the taste of triumph sweet on my lips. Yet I knew our work was just beginning, rebuilding trust, drafting transparent rules, and healing wounds inflicted by years of abuse. But in that moment, every challenge felt surmountable. We had faced down entitlement, exposed its rotten core, and emerged stronger together. And as the stars emerged overhead, I turned back to the crowd dispersing below and raised my voice in a final call to action. Share your thoughts. Was this justice, or did we overstep? Let us know if you believe our neighborhood's future lies in unity or retribution. The question hung in the warm night air, inviting debate, reflection, and the promise of true community.